So first, to introduce Mr. Chris Fenton, he is a Cornell alumni, as we mentioned, if you were previously on the call. He graduated with a degree in engineering in 1993, so a little bit of a harder subject than mine. My subject is government, so I'm taking the easier route on that one, Chris. And Chris is a very accomplished alumni. He just published a best-selling book, Feeding the Dragon, Inside the Trillion-Dollar Dilemma Facing Hollywood, the NBA, and American Business. Mr. Fenton has appeared on CBS This Morning, ABC News, Fox News, CNBC, BBC, and other outlets. And I also saw you appeared on Steve Bannon's War Room Pandemic podcast, which is a great show as well, which I'm a big fan of. He produced and or supervised over 21 Hollywood films, grossing over $2 billion. And we'll be discussing today the CCP's influence in Hollywood specifically, and also other topics more broadly. So please, everyone, do welcome Mr. Chris Fenton. We'll do the virtual round of applause. If this were in person, we would do the in-person round of applause. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us. It's really an honor to host this today.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to be on. Anything I can do for Cornell, I'm always game.
Absolutely, 100%. So first, I want to also say, I forgot to mention in the intro, but this is the first speaker series event, the first of many for the new China initiative that the Cornell Review launched. So we launched this China initiative, and it's going to be focusing on China's influence in academia, in Hollywood, in American corporations. It's going to be bringing together policy experts and policymakers and industry leaders like Chris to discuss U.S.-China relations, U.S.-China engagement, and to really, I would say, maintain American hegemony and to maintain American greatness. So it's very important. We want to bring in people from a diversity of perspectives. And today it's an honor to really kick it off with Chris. So Chris, let's get right into your book. So you have Feeding the Dragon. What inspired you? First, if you want to talk a little bit about your background in Hollywood in terms of getting movies into the Chinese market, what about that experience did you find most fulfilling, and what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I actually was at Cornell as an engineering undergrad up there, and I happened to see Kurt Vonnegut speak, who was a Cornell grad, and he happened to be a physics major. And somebody asked him in the crowd, how did you become a writer? And he said, well, I've never really been a writer. Well, you've written a bunch of books. Like, how'd you become an author? And he said, oh, I became an author because I was a physics major. And everybody was like sort of laughing in an uncomfortable kind of way. They didn't know what he meant. And he's like, the bottom line is everybody I know that studied the art of writing, whether it was an English major or literature or whatever it was so overly critical about everything they ever wrote that they never finished it. And he's like, I had some interesting story ideas that I just started typing down, and I had no idea whether I was any good or not. So I just finished them, and I would turn them into people, and people would be like, hey, this is really a great story. You should try to get it published. And he's like, that's how it worked. He said, I was just never aware of how bad or good I was. So I was actually able to complete stuff. And his theory was like, just go write something and finish it. That's the hardest part. So I actually started writing a book while I was in college that eventually the screenwrites sold to 20th Century Fox in 1997. It was called Behind These Ivy Walls. And it was my attempt at writing like a fictional diary of what the sequel to Catcher in the Rye would be. Not the most original idea in the world, but Fox thought it would make a great series of Animal House type movies. So they put it in development, but nothing ever came of them. But anyway, that was where I got my bug to write. But I put it to the side and found myself waiting tables at the Olive Garden in Westwood, which, by the way, one of the things I did with this book is it's written like a Michael Lewis memoir. If you ever read Liar's Poker, I read that a bunch before I embarked on this journey, and also read like Phil Knight's Shoe Dogs and a handful of other things to just try to understand how do you tie in like business ideas and lessons into something that's super entertaining and fun to read. That was my goal, because I wanted the book to essentially be approachable by people that sort of were interested in Hollywood, sort of were interested in China, sort of were interested in just a fun, crazy, colorful journey. That was the goal. And what came out of it was essentially a book that talks about how I even got into the China business to begin with, which starts from my early days graduating Cornell, becoming an Olive Garden waiter, working my way into the mailroom at William Morris, working my way up through William Morris, and then how this weird sort of Rod Tidwell type of client that I came across, a small Chinese company located in Beijing, that relationship sort of blossomed into something that the day I ended up getting let go because there was a management change at William Morris, I walked out of the office with a goldfish in hand. I didn't even have Renee Zellweger following me. And I made calls to clients, and one of them happened to be this Chinese entity. And they're like, well, no one else has called us, so we'll go with you. So then it was like, show me the money. So the whole idea was, okay, what do I do with this entity that's already doing stuff that hadn't been done before in a market that no one knows anything about, yet could be the largest economy in the world? And that thrust me into the world of China and the exchange of capitalism between one well-developed democracy in capitalism and one really underdeveloped infant stage of capitalistic communist country. And as that exchange grew, I went from doing production service work to, music publishing rights, to television stuff, to representing athletes in China, which were like Michael Phelps and Kobe Bryant, working with the NBA. And then eventually this coming of age party occurred, which I talk about in this American Thinker op-ed that I wrote this week, where in 2008, you had this country that had been in the middle of juvenile sort of developing kid to preteen to suddenly wanting to take on the world with this coming out debutante party, which was the 2008 Summer Olympics. And they stopped everything to make sure that coming out party was perfect, right? Or the coming of age party. And that coming of age party was essentially the symbolic benchmark of them moving from teenage adolescence into the early adulthood of capitalism. And after that was done, because the thing went perfectly. And by the way, if it didn't go perfectly, we didn't know about the things that didn't go perfectly. And if some of those things didn't go perfectly, I bet you we don't know about all the people that disappeared because of those little things that didn't go perfectly. But once that was done, the Chinese Communist Party wiped its brow and was like, thank God that's over. It went great. Now what? And then they set out a 100-year plan. And part of that were the industries that they wanted to dominate and make world-class and best in class as quickly as possible. And one of them was the film industry, something that I knew extremely well, better than the advertising marketing stuff I was doing, or the sports stuff I was doing, or the TV or film stuff I was doing, or the film or the music and production service stuff. I knew storytelling and I loved movies. So the first thing I did was start to hit all the markets around the world and say, I want your movie. We're going to release in China. Everybody was like, no, you can't. They only allow 15 movies in a year. I was like, don't worry. We got the infrastructure. We have the guanxi, as they call it, with the Chinese Communist Party. We can figure out how to get that stuff in. We got a lobbying group. We know what to do, blah, blah, blah. Everybody didn't believe we could pull it off. And of course we pulled it off, and then we pulled it off again. We pulled it off again. And then suddenly people were like, wow, don't just get our movies in that we've already made. Let's figure out how to make movies that cultivate what the China relevancy is that the Chinese Communist Party wants, in order to put more wind to the back and break more records and make more money. And that's what we did. And it crescendoed all the way through, say, 2016, 2017, when suddenly Donald Trump raised the alarm bells and said, hey, this globalistic mission, this mission that all of you have been under with China, is not in the best interest of the long-term American health and welfare, and it is compromising the values and principles that we hold dearly as United States of American citizens. And I still discounted that. I didn't really believe it. I was like, you know what? The more we get products and services into that country, the more GDP growth we have, the more jobs we create, and the more aspirational quality of democracy we infiltrate that country with, and the more they're going to become more like us. Well, that hasn't worked out very well. GDP growth has gone up, but it's been a sugar high. We're now seeing imitators and companies that we trained and swap processes with and tech theft with and all kinds of other stuff now taking our spot in that market as far as market share is concerned. We also didn't see the jobs that we thought were going to happen here in the United States occur. In fact, they all occurred over there. And then on top of it, and we really witnessed it with Hong Kong, we saw that whole idea that the aspirational quality of democracy that we were suddenly getting in there every time a product or service from America was used by that populace would eventually become the mantra of what they wanted to be one day. No, that didn't happen. In fact, they're more communist and totalitarian now than they have ever been in my career. So that didn't work. So now what do we do at this point? And that was the whole idea of the book, was to tell that story, that journey, the color, the trials, the tribulations, all that kind of stuff, and paint it in a very human picture, because I was not a greedy capitalist selling out the soul of America. I was actually under this misguided mission that all of us believed in thoroughly, that what we were doing was in the best interest of America. And it wasn't until way late in the game that we realized it wasn't. And that was how essentially the book ends. And then I talk about this trip that I did with 3 congressional members in September of 2019, just before COVID, actually, where we actually met with Carrie Lam, who runs Hong Kong on the ground. We had lunch with her. We met with protesters during the peak of that democratic protest. And we also were in Beijing, Chengdu, and Xi'an for over the course of 10 days. And that was a really sort of pivotal way I wanted to finish what I thought would be a great book and sort of say, okay, what do we want to do from here? And then boom, the Daryl Morey tweet that changed the world happened. And that's when I really woke up to the fact that, oh my God, we've been pandering and kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party way too long. Now everybody's aware of it. And now we really have a race against time to change things. Boom. How about that answer?
Very interesting. No, it's really, so just to backtrack for a second, because I want to kind of focus in on like what that shift was for you. What made you say, because I know it wasn't Donald Trump. I know when you said Donald Trump was first saying it, you kind of didn't necessarily take him at his word for it. But I want to ask, what was that shift for you where you said, was it a moment where you said, like, these people don't have, the CCP doesn't have America's best interest in mind? Was it something that you saw happen in Beijing, in China? What was it that was that like aha moment?
It's funny. A lot of people, there's nobody involved with the exchange between the 2 superpowers that has not had the aha moment at this point. But I could say 2 years ago, a lot of us hadn't, right? And my aha moment should have come a lot earlier. My wife, actually, in the book, there's an interesting passage where she and I are having a conversation about some of the stuff that I was doing with Iron Man 3 behind me to get into that market. And she said, it seems like you're compromising like what it is to be American and the freedom of speech rights we have and all that kind of stuff. I was like, no, you don't understand. This is smart. This is good for us. Like, we're going to get this movie in, it's going to make a lot of money, and this is the way you do it. And she's like, I don't know, I think you're feeding the beast. And that's essentially where we came up with the feeding the dragon idea for a title. But then even in the Los Angeles Times, there was an article that came out where they actually referred to me as like a Benedict Arnold of our generation. I would get certain, like, you're a shill for the Communist Party kind of comments after doing panel discussions or whatever else about how to get business done in China. There were moments along the way where I should have woken up to it, but the fact was I was so firmly ensconced in that belief in the mission that I thought everybody else was wrong. And so did every other cog in the machine that was doing what I was doing in whatever business or industry. So it wasn't really until the Daryl Morey tweet when
Could you elaborate on the Daryl Morey? I don't think a lot of people are familiar with that tweet.
Yeah, so Daryl Morey was the Houston Rockets general manager. He's now the president of the Philadelphia 76ers in the NBA, and that's why the Philadelphia 76ers simply don't exist as a brand or as a team in the China market today. Daryl Daryl Morey, during the peak of the Democratic protests in Hong Kong, tweeted out 7 words essentially supporting their right to do what they were doing. And I was on the sideline of my son's soccer game, and somebody sent me that tweet on a text, and I looked at it and I go, I don't know who this guy Daryl Morey is, but it says he's a Houston Rockets GM. I knew from my business with the NBA over the years that the Houston Rockets was the biggest branded team in the market, and was actually a big reason why the NBA caught so much wind to their back in growing what it was in China. And that had a lot to do with Yao Ming playing for the Rockets. But when I saw that, I thought, oh my God, I turned to a couple dads that were standing next to me and I said, that tweet is really going to hurt the NBA in China. And they're like, why is that? And I said, well, because Daryl Morey, this guy who's the GM of the Houston Rockets, just tweeted support for the Hong Kong protesters. And they were like, well, yeah, he should. I said, no, he shouldn't. China doesn't want that done. They're like, oh, he did that while he's in China. I was like, no, I think he did it while he was in Houston, Texas. And they're like, he should be able to do that. And I was like, yeah, he should, but it's not good. And anyway, I was 100% right. NBA fell into a firestorm. They were punished immediately. What I didn't see coming, the thing that shocked me, was not the bumbling and fumbling of the NBA response and their lack of support for him, and sort of how they could corral around one central narrative. It was more about the fact that journalists and critics and the American public picked up on the fact that the NBA wasn't standing by a guy who exercises freedom of speech rights while in Houston, Texas. Like, that made no sense to anybody. Like, I don't understand. And then as the stories came out deeper, it was like, oh, well, there's so much money on the line. Houston Rockets is worth another $1 billion because of what they do and what they mean in China. Everybody's staying quiet because the money is so big and the growth is so big, and Nike's staying quiet, all that kind of stuff. And people got really pissed off. And I did too. I was like, this is ridiculous. And then, of course, the aha moment where I was like, oh, shit, that's what I've been doing the last 20 years. And there
Yeah.
you go. That was the aha moment.
It's very interesting. So we're at the stage now where China is rising. China is an economic power. Their military is very competitive and growing. There's a lot of influence in Hollywood, as you point out. There's a lot of influence in American businesses, specifically the NBA. What would you recommend to industry leaders, to policymakers in this country? Where do we go from here? How do we solve this problem of not only protecting free speech in America, but also making sure that we could support freedom abroad in places like Hong Kong? Where do we go from here?
Well, number one is we got to protect the ability to even speak about it. Like, it's so ridiculous that while on the soil of America, we can't talk about this openly and at least have the conversation about how to do this stuff, right? I mean, the Mulan controversy that blew up last September, Disney wasn't allowed to talk about it at all. What's going on with Nike and H&M and Adidas and Hugo Boss, they can't talk about it at all, right? Like, no one can talk about it. In fact, Boeing comes out yesterday and makes a statement of, hey, we can't, our government has to separate trade issues from issues that are intruding on the rights and the values and the principles of humans and American rights and principles and values and all that kind of stuff. Like, we need to separate those two. Otherwise, if we don't, the Chinese Communist Party is going to get upset. They're going to kick us out, and Airbus is going to take all our business, right? And I read that and I go, okay, well, first of all, China's launching its first commercial airline that they are building, their first commercial airplane, which literally looks like Airbus and Boeing had sex, and this is the baby that came out of it, right? Like, it is a pure, unadulterated copycat of whatever technology and blueprints are in both of those planes. So both of those companies are going to lose market share very quickly once that comes online. Number two is, are the French really going to allow Airbus to bend over and take Boeing's business when the French, quite frankly, I just did a big documentary over there for France too, have been calling out this issue longer than we have. So I don't know if that's actually the case and would be allowed. And number three is I'm going, well, wait a minute. This isn't hurting cats in this particular industry. There are two airplane manufacturers that mean anything in the commercial aviation business, Airbus and Boeing. They should take a stand and go, enough's enough. Like, we're going to be able to talk about this stuff. We're going to be able to address it. We're going to actually come up with ideas to solve it. And if you penalize us, then we're not going to do any business with your market. And what does the Chinese Communist Party do when their own airplane manufacturer can only deliver, what, 5 planes or something this year? They're suddenly going to be put against the wall and realize, whoa, we pushed this too far. We got to back off, right? So you're asking a question, how do we address it? And the way to address it is strengthen numbers, right? They can take retaliatory actions against one league like the NBA, or against one studio like Disney, or against one film director like Chloe Zhao, or against one company like a Nike or a Hugo Boss or whatever it is. But when they take a stand and retaliate against multiple entities that suddenly cannot get their products and services in there, that their public has gotten used to being able to consume, then they start creating discontent. And the number one goal for the Chinese Communist Party is to keep 1.4 billion people just happy enough that they don't revolt. And that's a really difficult task because it doesn't take much to light dry kindling on fire. And they know that. And right now, they are dealing with the fact that they have built off the backs of all of us suffering from COVID, a very strong economy that's breaking out of the COVID, devastation faster than anywhere else. So they're feeling really good about themselves. And on top of it, their populace is feeling pretty excited about the government that's running them, because when you look at January 6th, what happened here, civil unrest, issues with debt, various bumblings that we've done as a government or whatever, they're blasting that stuff through the narrative of the Ministry of Propaganda to their people. And it is emphasizing the message that they have the best government out there. Look at how dirty and disorganized democracy is, right? But it can easily change on a dime. Like if COVID went slightly the other way a year ago and they didn't get that under control, they would have been behind the 8 ball. And then it would have been really easy for discontent to occur with all these people locked in their buildings, yet people still getting sick, or the messaging getting out of how many people actually really did die in Wuhan. All that stuff starts to spill out there, and it doesn't take much to create enough discontent to create another Tiananmen Square incident. So they know they live on pins and needles every day. So when you push back with real leverage that can cause real discontent, even in a small piece of that society, you can make great gains. And that's what we need to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting, the points that you raise, and I'm so glad to have you here as an expert on these subjects. I see you. I'm going to ask two more questions. One is about the Beijing Olympics, and then the other is, I guess I'll ask them at the same time, and I'll let you answer. And the other one is kind of unrelated to the issue of China, but I am kind of curious about it. As a Cornell alumni, just your experience going from being an engineering major and graduating with a degree in engineering to what made you make the switch to Hollywood directing. That's a very interesting path, and I think it's good, especially for students who are in the arts and sciences colleges, students who are in maybe majors that aren't necessarily a clear cut, okay, this is accounting, you go into working for one of the big four firms in accounting. I am curious to hear your path in that as well, and also your recent article on the Beijing Olympics. So whichever order you prefer, and then after that we'll go to audience Q&A.
Yeah, sure. Well, how I ended up going from engineering into Hollywood, there was literally no plan. I graduated in '93, which happened to be a pretty low point in the overall American economy for one reason or another. It wasn't like a COVID recession. It wasn't like 2008, but it wasn't good either. I think I had roughly like a 2.8 GPA. So those incoming call, like one or two job offers, pick the best one situation didn't happen for me. I think I had, roughly 2 interviews the whole time I was there. So I was not particularly loving engineering anyway. And because I didn't get a job in engineering, it allowed me to think about, well, what else would I do? And instead of figuring out what I wanted to do, I just was thinking, where do I want to live? And I read a book by a Native American named William Least Heat Moon. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It was called uh, shit. It was called Blue Highways. I almost forgot. And it was about how he traveled the blue highways of America to find, what the United States was all about. He stayed off of freeways. He would sit in a diner for 3 hours in given towns and just talk to people and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that would be a cool thing for me to do. So that's what I did. And I was a Phi Gamma Delta. So I went to college towns across the country where I could possibly set up roots and live. And I think it hit like 60 towns or something like that. And I just crashed on my fraternity couch and hung out until I got kicked out and moved on to the next town. And I ended up I ended up coming out to LA because a buddy of mine had a roommate who, was freaking out and didn't want to live in LA. He wanted to move back to upstate New York. So he was stuck having to pay full freight of a $640 a month studio in Westwood, and asked if I wanted to see what it was like in LA. So I came out to LA just to visit, and I never left. I was like, this place is awesome. It's 72 and sunny every day. There's palm trees, beautiful people. It was hard to leave. And I got a job waiting tables at the Olive Garden because I was flat broke. And met a couple guys who told me, hey, you should think about getting in the entertainment business. And I said, well, I'm not an actor or director or anything. They're like, oh, those are just like two small parts of the whole thing. There's all these other businesses in it and different jobs. And at the time, it was considered the Wall Street of the 90s. So I said, oh, how do I get in? And next thing I know, I'm playing in these pickup basketball leagues with a bunch of big celebrities. Like, at the time, no one knew who they were. It was like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon and Matthew McConaughey and people like that, but they all turned into big actors. But we all sort of started in the freshman class of Hollywood together. And I ended up getting a temp job at the William Morris Agency, and then worked my way into the mailroom, making $300 a week, and was teaching SAT courses in Malibu to filthy rich kids on weekends. And that's how the journey began. So I guess if there's a moral to that story, number one is I talk about keeping Rolodexes, which don't exist anymore, but your network that you're creating at Cornell and at the high schools you went to, those are the most valuable, essentially jewels you'll ever collect during your life. They become sort of your safety net in regards to everything you do in your career. And I sort of look at it as if life is a lottery, and there's so much luck involved in being successful. It's crazy. Like, this whole idea that everybody does it by themselves is BS. Like, you need a lot of luck, but how do you create luck if you're playing the lottery? Well, you try to buy as many tickets as you can and get a hold of as many as you can, because that will better your odds to win the lottery. So the way I see it is, everything you learn, every adventure you go on, everything you do that's out of the box other than just sitting on your couch, those are lottery tickets. And then every person you meet, and every person you meet through those people, and everybody you're good to, and everybody that you create a relationship with where you can ask for something from, those are lottery tickets. And through life, hopefully you collect enough so you put the luck on your side. I know some people where, all the lottery tickets they put together perfectly didn't add up to some, crazy score, but the majority, I believe, have, whatever that level of success is that they consider successful. It's not, I will tell you, just wanting to be a billionaire or something is not a really great indicator of success. There's so much other stuff in life that will make you happy other than just making dough. But I will tell you, making money does provide a lot of opportunity to create other lottery tickets that can create more fun in your life. So anyway, it's a long-winded way of saying I didn't have a plan, yet I lived life to its fullest, and stuff happened, and then when that stuff happens, you got to recognize an interesting opportunity. And I would say there's a handful of opportunities that presented themselves that I didn't take for one reason or another. And I still think about them and wonder how my life would have evolved differently. But for the most part, I think I saw good opportunities and I went after them. And that's part of it, is having those opportunities unfold in front of you and just keeping an eye out for them and making the right decisions when they come. To answer the other question, which was, what was the other question?
Right. So first, it's very inspiring what you said. So
Oh,
thank you for that.
the Beijing
The
Olympics.
Beijing Olympics. Yeah.
All right. So the Beijing Olympics, I've been getting frustrated. I lecture at the National War College and at the military academies about soft power influence. That's actually a big part, or not a big part, but it's a part of the Pentagon strategy just overall, and it has been for decades. So I've been a little frustrated by this idea of whether we boycott the Olympics or not, because I think that's a dumb question. It's like, why would we boycott the Olympics? What's in it? Like, what can we gain from doing that? Or what do we lose by doing it? Like that is more the question. And if we have something to gain by boycotting the Olympics, then we probably have something bigger to gain by threatening to boycott the Olympics, because we have 300 days to get something accomplished between now and then. So this op-ed I wrote was essentially about looking at the Beijing Olympics that way and saying, hey, this is no longer the debutante coming of age party that 2008 was. China's now an adult, and they want to throw a perfect fancy dinner party. And part of making that a perfect party is to have perfect attendance from all the invitees. So what happens if we're threatening not to show up and our Western allies threaten not to show up? Well, that is going to create an issue for the Chinese Communist Party in a lot of different ways. But what if we say, hey, we will show up if you do A, B, and C? So that's what the op-ed was, which was not really, these are the 8 ideas that we have to implement in order to carry out what my idea is. It's more, hey, let's use Beijing 2022 as a pressure point to get some constructive changes done in the US-China relationship. Here are 8 suggestions of those, ones that I think in individuality could be achievable, have some practicality issues to them, and could be baby steps to bigger goals down the road. And the response to it has been very good. And the response to it also is like, well, I don't know if that one's possible, but what about this? Great. I love that. I'm not saying those are the 8 to use. I'm saying here's 8 ideas. What are 8 other ideas? What are 8 other ideas? And let's come up with the best ones. And let's do something about this problem that we have with China while we have the leverage to do it.
Absolutely, for sure. Okay, so I want to reiterate, the book is Feeding the Dragon. So it's available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes & Noble, all the major distributors. You can find Chris Fenton at Feeding the Dragon. That's the username on Twitter. And of course, search Fenton as
at
well.
the Dragon Feeder. So yeah, I have a podcast called Feeding the Dragon. I got the book, and then at the Dragon Feeder is where you can exchange whatever you want with me on Twitter. I'm super involved with like anybody that wants to talk about this topic, mainly because I love different points of view on it, because I'm constantly trying to tailor what I need to do when I'm being vocal about this, where it can move in the direction that moves a majority of the American public towards a common goal.
Absolutely. Great. Well, this is a great honor. We're going to switch now to the audience Q&A. So if you're in the audience and you would like to ask a question, we're going to go to Bob first because he has his hand up. Please use the raise my hand function, and you'll be able to do that at the bottom. So please use the raise my hand function. So first to Bob. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Chris. I really enjoyed your presentation, but it reminded me of a debate that's currently pending on the Cornell campus. The hotel school has started or proposed a joint degree program with Peking University so that someone could get a dual degree studying hotel administration in Peking. Okay. And obviously the hoteliers made the argument similar that you made to your wife, and the more politically oriented faculty members from the Arts College and so on made the argument that your wife was making to you. And I would wonder how you feel about that, and how you feel what the duties are of an academic institution that's trying to go out and penetrate the foreign marketplace, and all they're selling is essentially their reputation. So instead of licensing basketball merch, we're selling Cornell degrees.
Well, it's a great question because I've been meaning to ask that to you. So the Free Beacon I saw has been covering it mainly because that writer also went to Cornell. But I haven't seen any, like, has the Daily Sun covered this thing at all? Or I was looking for articles on it, or is it sort of a covered up?
Very little. It only came up and debated yesterday at the faculty meeting.
Well, I just was, in all fairness, the Cornell Review has covered it, but the Daily Sun has not.
Yeah, because I saw, well, first it was professors that had a problem with it. And then I saw that the student body then also decided to support, like, fighting against this Peking University initiative. Now, I will say, I thought it was, because I've been involved with the infrastructure that Cornell put in China. Like, I think it might be almost 10 years. Cornell was one of the first Ivy League, and it was also one of the first major universities to open up a campus in Beijing. And it's been there quite some time. In fact, I brought 2 different US congressional delegations through that facility to shake hands with faculty and students. So it's been ongoing for a while. And I was actually really proud of it, right? Like I bragged about it, and I made sure that our government officials knew about it and stuff. So, but that was pre my awakening, right? Is that the same thing that this dispute's about? Like, is that what
No,
you're upset of?
no. And the president who was president at that time really only lasted 3 years, and his foreign adventurism essentially got him ushered out. But what this is a proposed dual degree program so that the people in Peking, at their campus at Peking University don't really have very much expertise in hotel administration. And so we would do a technology transfer and have hotel professors rotate through their campus, and end up when a hotelier graduates from the Peking University, they would have a dual degree from both universities in the topic of hotel administration. And of course, there would be inevitably restrictions, just like the restrictions on Boeing or whatever. So you wouldn't want to run around the Peking University campus being anti-communist.
Yeah, well, there was a version of, I mean, I think it's been ongoing, but maybe it ended, but there was definitely a very strong version of this, not just hotel school, it was for the whole school. And I think it required Chinese kids to come and spend at least like maybe 3 weeks. The business school definitely had one. And then I think there was one for the undergrad where they had to actually be on campus for like 3 or 4 weeks in order to finish the whole program. But am I supportive of it now? Well, I'm not in certain ways, right? Like cultural and commercial exchange. I talk about Fenton's 5 forces of diplomacy in the book, which are human rights, politics, national security, culture, and commerce. Human rights, national security, and politics, we're not going to agree on with China. So that leaves culture and commerce as the only two potential bonds that keep us from a Cold War or a war. So I want to see those continue after a reset, right? Like the same way Europe wanted to continue doing work and exploiting our market after they reset what we were doing to them with our industrial revolution. But until we reset, I don't I don't like the idea. And the reason for that is I actually believe it's a national security issue. And it sounds a little ridiculous to say, except if you look at the way China looks at their art of war, you know, they're a 5,000-year-old, you know, country, a nation, and they look at things in very long-term sort of chess playing type of strategies. And if you look at what the Confucius Institutes are, and if you look at what, you know, this particular exchange is and many others that they have with other schools, it's a way to infiltrate the the way students, young students think, right? And it's super subtle. And it sounds super nefarious or often misguided to actually say, oh, there's something really bad about this, right? Because it just seems very harmless in a way. But the problem is that the way China looks at it is, hey, influencing these kids now is not going to benefit them at all right now in the short term. None of these kids have powerful positions or whatever. But in 20 years, when some of these kids are running businesses or running government or running various influential entities, they're going to process all of that at an early age and digest it over time. And that's going to work in the favor of the Chinese Communist Party. It's the same way that I liked how Donald Trump wanted to go after TikTok and ByteDance. It seems ridiculous to watch my 14-year-olds play, you know, do, you know, dances or whatever on TikTok and think that could be used against us. But the fact is, it's not going to be used against us right now. But all of that knowledge, all that data, as harmless and weird as it seems right now, there will be AI technology that can take all of that and figure out how to use it against us in some sort of competitive way. It might not be next year. It might not be 5 years or 10 years from now. It could be 20 years from now. It doesn't matter. The Chinese Communist Party, they've been around 5,000 years. They think they're going to be around another 5,000 years. They think the long game. And that's one of the biggest disadvantages we have as the United States of America and the way the system works right now, right? We financialize the system to a point where, you know, short-term or daily swings of stocks create policy reactions immediately, or quarterly results cause major shifts in the way companies think over the long term because of these short-term quarterly result issues, right? Or 2 to 4 year election cycles, or the fact that election cycles actually never stop. All that stuff is forcing us to play a game of checkers against a country that's playing a game of chess. And that's what worries me. And that's what worries me about what you're bringing up about Peking University, which on the surface, I get seems like, hey, let's just make some money. Yeah, it's compromising a little bit of the brand, but what's the big deal? I think there's a bigger deal than just that.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Sam Kim.
Yeah, and I definitely agree on the point of like long-term subversion, and it's been a topic that not only the CCP has employed, but I remember there was a lecturer in the 1980s, Yuri Bezmenov, a former KGB agent, who actually talked about the KGB strategy of trying to subvert American culture over like 20 to 30-year periods. My question is on doing business in China. You mentioned earlier that you gained guanxi with Chinese officials, and you mentioned that that despite the official Chinese policies on entertainment, limiting the number of foreign films, you managed to bring in a number of foreign films into the Chinese market. So how did you cultivate those relationships And what do you think the role Guangxi plays in policy demonstrates about the structure of the CCP and possibly some of the corruption that occurs within the government?
It's a good question. So the Guanxi was not like look at me. I'm not Chinese, right? So the real Guanxi that gets stuff done in China is a China on China interaction, right? So the only thing I could do was understand how the China and China interaction works in regards to cultivating the relationship and the sell on why something should be approved to get into that market. Okay. What I would do with that knowledge and with the team that we had was we would come up with, um, you know, for me, the English language version of what I think might work with a Chinese Communist Party member and making them feel like them saying yes would look good to the boss over them, to the boss over them, to the boss over them. So, for instance, in the case of like Looper behind me, we came up with the idea. Okay, first of all, Looper was supposed to. Did anybody see the movie Looper? Are there any hands up? Maybe. Um, I highly recommend you see Looper. It's a great film. It is directed by Rian Johnson, who did Knives Out and also does the Star Wars movies. It's a fantastic film. And the movie was supposed to take place in the present day in the United States of America and in the future in France. And it's a time travel movie. And time travel is not an allowed form of content in China because China wants to control the narrative of what's happened in the past, and they want to control the narrative of what's going to happen in the future. So what we decided to do was to work with the filmmakers to change the future to China. And then we decided, in order to showcase what China was 40 years in the future, we would work with Communist Party officials to design essentially Shanghai, which is where the location was, to design Shanghai in the vision that they had for it 40 years in the future, which was, you know, developing certain cityscape skylines. We saw what their 50-year plan was for the Pudong district anyway. So we designed some of the footprints of the buildings that they wanted to build and what the different symbolism of it was, and make it as majesty, you know, full of majesty and technologically, you know, advanced civilization as possible. And what's interesting is we modeled it out, and those models still sit in Shanghai's municipal government offices. Like, they're so proud of that movie. And part of that was A, working with the CCP to design it, but B, showcasing China as the country and city and place in the future where everybody wanted to live, which is what the plot of the movie ended up being. And for the Chinese Communist Party to know that we were making a movie, a Hollywood movie, a blockbuster movie, that the underlying theme was, in the future, you want to live in China. That was an easy China on China sell to get that movie approved for the market. And not only that, to shoot those Shanghai scenes, we hired Chinese crews to work side by side with best-in-class crews from the US so that they can learn the process of filmmaking at a world-class level, which, by the way, is biting us in the ass today. But that was all part of that process of making sure 1.4 billion people are just happy enough that they don't revolt. And the way they do that is they think their government's doing something that's great for them. Well, guess what? We were creating jobs on the ground in China for various individuals as part of their film industry. And then we were showcasing China, which is so important for the Ministry of Propaganda, right? We were showcasing China as the place in the future where you wanted to be. If you live in China and you know a major Hollywood blockbuster is talking about how 40 years in the future, everybody wants to live in China, that makes you pretty proud. That doesn't make you want to revolt against your government. That makes you proud. So that allowed us to release the movie during a national holiday week when no, imported movies are allowed to release. And then on top of it, it made it a top 10 movie that year, even though a movie like that should have never been allowed in the market to begin with. So that's how it works. It's sort of, we would work together on creating a narrative that should be a good China on China sale. And then the Chinese colleagues of mine who were part of the lobby in Guangxi, Shirley group would go do it.
Awesome. Let's go to James Lapone.
Hi, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks so much. This has been so interesting. So my question to you would be, if Joe Biden came to you today, knocked on your door and said, what are your suggestions for how we combat this issue with China? What would be your suggestions?
Well, I would like to see the government needs to somehow create some sort of rules of engagement so that we don't have every company doing, well, I guess there's so many levels to it, right? I'm thinking of on a business level, which is super important because all these companies and industries are essentially continuing as normal while we have all these other geopolitical controversial things happening between the US and China, right? So in a way, we got to say, hey, we want to engage with China, but we need to pull back and address a bunch of things. And you need to tell your shareholders and your investors that disruption is going to occur. But when we get done with it, we're going to go back to a stronger relationship with China because it's now much fairer and more balanced. And the only way that works is if everybody's in it together, right? That Airbus Boeing example is a perfect sort of, two-hander that you can put in there. If one person takes a stand, the other one's going to be like, hey, I'm glad they're doing something that's good for the country, but I'm a capitalist, so I'm just going to take their job, take what they were doing. We can't have that happen. And we can't we can't come down on individual companies as a country or individual people like LeBron James and say, I'm Senator Marco Rubio. LeBron James, you need to speak up on behalf of the democratic protests in Hong Kong and tell, the Chinese Communist Party that they're wrong to crack down on it. Okay, well, Senator Marco Rubio, that is really easy for you to say because you don't have 50 million a year riding on that market. You don't have skin in the game. LeBron James does. So as bad as it is that LeBron James does not speak up about it, I can understand why he doesn't. And I can also understand that if he does, nothing changes except for him losing 50 million a year, right? The only way it works is if the government, Senator Marco Rubio says, the government of the United States of America is going to back you to say the right things. And if there's retaliation against you in that market, we are going to stand behind you as a government, and all business leaders of every league partner out there, we're all going to stand behind you and not do business with China until it's fixed. That's the only way we do it, right? United we stand, divided we fall. That's the United States way. And right now, all we do is do things divided, right? Like it's just not American the way we have moved towards with our system, and China's taking full advantage of it.
Absolutely. Let's go to Alex.
Hi, Chris. First of all, thank you very much for your genuine and insightful sharing. My question to you is that, and I agree very much that we need to unite and we have power in numbers. My question for you is that many people think that China is like a giant market. They have like 1/4 of the global population, but then there are like the remaining 3/4 that we forget. And my question is that do you have some thoughts on like how do we cultivate a human rights supporting ecosystem that where people will feel safe to say whatever they want with regards to human rights and with no concern of the repercussion from China?
So you mean outside of China or inside China?
A system where people will feel safe, whether it's like regardless of the location.
Right. Well, I mean, it just comes down to freedom of speech, right? Like we should have, first of all, freedom of speech has ramifications, right? On a capitalistic basis, like if you own Chick-fil-A and you say you don't support the right to gay marriage, you're going to lose business from homosexuals and from people that support that community and the rights for them to marry, right? You're just going to lose that business. And that is your right to lose that business, and it is your right to say what you feel. Okay. It's not your right to ban them from going in your restaurant, right? But they're not going to want to go in your restaurant because they know where you stand. Okay. That's different than saying, I don't respect or believe in the right for homosexuals to marry, and then have the government come and shut down your business, right? That is what happens in China, right? So what's interesting is that China has a propaganda organ through the Ministry of Propaganda, where if somebody comes out and says something, and we're seeing it now with the Xinjiang province situation, where netizens and the youth, the Communist Youth Party, and then also consumers are boycotting H&M and Nike stuff just naturally, because they're upset that they're claiming their best in the world cotton is being picked by people that are forced to pick it, right? And in China, a lot of people believe that's a made up thing from the West. Okay, so they're boycotting with their pockets. That to me is okay. That's the beauty of free speech and the ramifications of free speech. And by the way, hate speech, the same thing. That's protected too. But you want to go utilize your right to hate speech, just be ready that somebody's going to punch you in the jaw or whatever. That's a ramification for it. What is happening though, that's the problem, is that, and we saw it with H&M, they make a statement against Xinjiang cotton, and the government orders the app, orders H&M off the e-commerce apps. And then we're not sure it's happening or not, but we're seeing stores closed because landlords are locking the stores so they're not open. Who's directing that? Is that the landlord doing it, or is that local officials doing that? What is it? When government intervenes on free speech rights and creates a market reaction simply by banning it, that is not what we want, right? And then the other thing that you're bringing up is safety, right? So there should be a real concerted effort on a united international level to curb the influence of this national security law that, by the way, I lectured at a Cornell business school course a couple months ago in the last semester, and the national security law created some real issues with some of the Chinese students that were tied in on Zoom, because they were super nervous that some of the stuff that was being discussed was being watched, because Zoom is a Chinese company, and they felt like maybe their families might have issues, right? So that's something we have to be really careful about, because that national security law does apply to all Chinese nationals. And quite frankly, it affects all of us too. Like it hasn't been tested yet because of COVID, but there is a theory that the national security law would apply to me if I end up going back to China. Like I could end up, in prison for what I was saying about China that was against what the national security law is trying to protect the Chinese Communist Party from.
Yeah, it's certainly very concerning, the assault on free speech. Chris, I do realize now it's 7 o'clock. So are you cool with staying on for an extra 5-10 minutes if there's any other questions, or do you have to?
Yeah, sure. And I don't know, there was a little, it was sort of did I answer that question? It was a little challenging, a question. I don't know if I hit it. It was a good one.
I thought it was answered. Alex, you thought it was a suffice answer? I definitely thought so.
That was a very good answer. Thank you.
Will Cornell protect students to stay anonymous on class Zooms? Oh, Samuel, I guess you know Samuel.
Yeah, so I had another question, but just to answer that. So there's an organization on campus called the Society for the Promotion of East Asian Liberty, And one of our initiatives last year was identifying a number of these controversial classes. And all the professors whom we reached out to said that they, at least, I don't know if there's an institutional policy per se, but I know the professors I've reached out to, they said they've issued disclaimers at the beginning of classes saying, some of the material is going to be controversial, and if like for any reason you need like alternative accommodations, like you can only listen to recordings of lectures, not actually like be on the lecture yourself, that they make those accommodations available.
So that's it. So, well, two things. One is, on one side, I'm glad they're protecting, because Cornell has a huge Chinese population, or at least did pre-COVID and pre a lot of this stuff, and the business school especially does. So I'm glad they're trying to protect that, the health and welfare of people and their families. But on the other side of it, which I want to separate the two, right, is how fucked up is it that it's a United States of America college campus and we have to protect students with a disclaimer of that from a communist country that's on the other side of the world that is essentially monitoring free speech rights that are values and principles and things that people have died for in this country. Like, how messed up is that? That is really messed up.
Yeah, not only is it fucked up, but it's totally unacceptable. That's why we have to push back against it and stand strong for the democratic values that we have as a country. So I'm going to go to Sam. I'm kind of curious what Roland thinks of all this. So Roland, if you have a question, Roland is not only is he the treasurer of this great organization, which we've now rebuilt to be very financially successful, but in addition to that, he's also the military affairs analyst for the Cornell Review. He's a veteran of the armed forces of the Marines. So I'll go to Sam and Roland. If you have any questions or any comments for Chris, not to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious what your kind of thoughts are on this topic.
Hey, one quick question: are the ROTC programs still on campus?
I'm not sure does anyone know?
Yeah, the ROTC.
Oh, gotcha.
Are they? They are. I was Army ROTC up there, so. But I thought they ended them for a bit, and then I heard that they brought them back. I was just curious.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah. So we actually have a member who's an ROTC too. I don't think he's on the call, but so we'll go to Sam and then to Roland, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so just to briefly follow up, I've heard that even religious student groups have had issues, even pre-COVID, where I don't know if this was China or CCP, but students from these countries would attend like a religious meeting and then they'd receive a very threatening communication saying like, this is your government, we know that you've attended this meeting, stop attending this meeting or these religious gatherings. So I definitely agree that there is a clear and present danger, especially to academic freedom and freedom of speech from China. But my question is really about intellectual property theft. And when it comes to things like physical technology, like an airplane or a device, I can definitely see how intellectual property theft can occur and is disadvantageous to American films. On the other hand, with the entertainment industry, how specifically is China engaged in intellectual property theft? Is it more of a theft of technology and film production methods, or are they going like, secret agent style, CIA covert operation style, and trying to steal scripts?
I think there's just more of a look. I mean, like the freedom of individual expression and individual creative freedoms hasn't really been around very long in China. So most of the stuff in the early days was either imported or it was imitations of something that they had seen. There's still imitations of various plots and scripts and movies and stuff, but it's less in people's face, mainly because there's a lot more exposure to it and China's been caught, and quite frankly they probably really don't need to do it that much anymore anyway. So the I think the real IP theft, unfortunately, wasn't really theft. It was more complicity in getting them caught up to speed to build their own film industry, and what we did to help train them and help them understand the process and help them understand development, actually the hard nuts and bolts of production, the types of equipment, the amount of companies that have set up either post-production houses over there or pre-production houses or VFX houses, the studios that have set up joint ventures, all that. They've learned how to mimic what we do in a way that makes it really world-class and caters to their market in a fantastic way. So it's people like me who are really were the problem that got us to this point. It wasn't necessarily them, like with Siemens, where like the execs found the test track that they were, going to show the prototype maglev train on. There was a tent over it and a bunch of Chinese, engineers were in there studying the design and all that kind of stuff. Like, it wasn't as in your face as that. It was more complicit work with Hollywood.
Also, Chris, I really enjoy your sort of like openness about it and reflection on like, this was the wrong thing and here's why we thought this was the right thing to do at the time, but now I look back and I recognize it's not. And I just really appreciate that sort of like openness. And I also appreciate sort of from the audience the kind of like interest in hearing that, because I think too many times in America today, especially more so on the left than the right, but I think people are sort of like held to a different standard or like held to things like, oh, well, you should have known this at the time. And like, there's not really much opportunity for like personal, like, I don't say personal redemption, because maybe that's like making it too dramatic than what it really is. But there's not in American politics as much as there used to be and as much as there should be, like allowing people to switch their positions and realize maybe I felt this way about something 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but I now look back and realize that was incorrect. So I just definitely appreciate that from you.
Well, I think I look at, somebody like, Bernie Sanders, for instance. Like, there's somebody I respect and admire because he has stood by a belief he's had for whatever, 50 years, right? And regardless of whether you believe in it or not, or agree with it, like, I like the fact that he hasn't been flip-flopped by what's going to make him the most popular, right? And to me, I think it's easy for me to live with a change in position because it's a change in the symptom of a position, I would say, versus the cold, right? To me, the root of who I am is somebody that, I was Army ROTC. I actually was going to go to West Point and I realized I wasn't cut out for it. So I took a ROTC scholarship instead. But I feel very indebted to the country I live in. I always wanted to do what was best for the country. And I'm also a capitalist and I wanted to be really successful in a career and stuff. And I thought I found the perfect ingredient to do what was great for the country and have a career that was successful and capitalist, right? And it turns out it wasn't that. So I didn't change what my older underlying goal was as a person. I changed what I started to realize wasn't what I thought it was, right? It's almost like, hey, I want to be really healthy, and somebody told me 30 years ago to smoke a pack of cigarettes every day makes you really healthy. And then one day a study comes out and says, oh no, that will kill you. Like, you're not changing your underlying belief that you want to be healthy. You're changing the fact that you just realized what you were doing was wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Let's go to Roland. We'll go to Zion, who is, by the way, an essay candidate for, I believe, essay president. So we have a prestigious member of the audience here. We wish him a lot of luck. And so we'll go to Roland first.
Chris, thank you for speaking today. I happened to stumble upon your IMDb page and I saw that you're listed as being a producer for Waiting. So I'd also like to thank you for that cinematic masterpiece.
It was my Olive Garden experience brought to life. It was my first production credit. So
Yeah, I noticed. Yeah, yeah, great. Thank you for your work on that. Now, unfortunately, did miss the first half hour. So you may have covered this. Every time that we talk about China, this comes up. Do you think that the progress China has made in the BRI is sustainable? The Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah. Is the progress that they make sustainable? Well, there are, like, I'm a hawk on a dove to hawk scale. Hawk wants full nuclear war. Dove wants something way more dovish than even Obama had. I'm like a 6, right? And so I believe we need to have a severe disruption of what the bilateral relationship is, but I don't want Cold War or war. There are a lot of hawks that believe China wants to dominate the world, right? My feeling is the only thing the Chinese Communist Party cares about is holding power and not having another Tiananmen Square happen. That's all they care about. So, because they got a great situation, right? Like overseeing the whole world only takes what they already have and complicates it. So my feeling is that the Belt and Road Initiative is really about them trying to make sure their 1.4 billion people are just happy enough they don't revolt. So you see, like, it's not really Belt and Road, but it's sort of Belt and Road, like this Iran deal. They need oil to supply their economy and run their sources of energy there. So they made a $400 billion 25-year deal with Iran. They need massive commodities and natural resources that are available in Africa. So you see them doing all kinds of Belt and Road initiatives down there. They need infrastructure, access in regards to ports and potential military involvement with pirates around the world and so on. So you see them building, ports in Sri Lanka or whatever it is, that are technically the nation that's building it, but they're also supplying the debt and the capital to build that stuff. So all that is to say that I feel like they have their hands full just keeping what's awesome for them, which is holding power in a totalitarian regime. And they just need to spread their wings in order to continue keeping that just happy enough 1.4 billion population in line. I don't think one day they just want to take over the United States or something like that. I just don't. It just doesn't. Like, if you have, it's like they have great lives, like, but it's on pins and needles because 1.4 billion people is a lot of people.
Let's go to Zion for the final question.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm just going to take this off so I'm a little bit more clear. But you had mentioned the student assembly and I believe in the resolution that they passed. My question was there something that you think the student assembly or the essay could do that maybe the university had missed, that the student assembly should be encouraging to help Chinese students, just like from your research?
So are you talking about this national security law thing? Or are you talking about the Peking University controversy?
Either or. Mine was more the security law, but if you had something on the latter, I would be okay hearing that as well.
Well, the national security law, I think the student, essentially the student body should raise awareness of the fact that, well, first of all, raise awareness that the fact that there needs to be protection of Chinese nationals and people from Hong Kong and, quite frankly, Taiwan too, when they're studying at Cornell. Like, that has to be done. Professors have to recognize that, and the schools should, and we shouldn't be on Zoom. We should be on something else. Then the second thing is they should bring to light the fact that we even have to do that, right? Like, I think there's a huge movement that students could create starting at Cornell that could spread throughout the Ivy League and throughout universities around the country, that essentially could groundswell into a change of the way the Chinese Communist Party operates with that national security law. Like, you guys could make it, they don't want controversy. They don't want these tempests in a teapots turning into geopolitical events, right? And there's no better way to do that than the youth coming out and saying this is BS, right? And that would cause them to realize, whoa, we got to back off on this and change things. And that is something that could really happen from the ground level of a university like Cornell and with the student body. So that's on the national security law side. The Peking University thing is, I mean, there's two versions. There's the one where there's an actual exchange of students and the ability for students in Ithaca to go to China and vice versa, which is a really integrated Cornell type of curriculum and course, and not a sellout or a licensing of the brand, like I think you guys were describing this particular instances. So I would say that true exchange, which is a cultural exchange and an educational exchange, can be really good as long as it's a national security monitored system and there's no obvious influence from the Chinese Communist Party. I like that, okay? Plus, there's money to make in the real sense of being a university. The branding thing, I hate, because that's done in the accounting firms, that's done in the banking world. It's the ability to essentially brand something, and we see it in the SEC accounting issues all the time with the US capital markets, is that, these Chinese companies are essentially audited by Ernst & Young China, but that Ernst & Young China has really no oversight from Ernst & Young, in headquarters, nor does it have the processes and all the different diligence that's typically done. They just do it their way, but under the brand that looks like it's part of that global entity. So in that scenario, in that case study, I don't like it at all. And I don't like it applied to my alma mater.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, I want to say we've done a lot of these, and this is really one of my favorites, if not the favorite. This has really been a great honor and very informative, very entertaining. I hope it's the first of many events that we do with you going towards the future. And the book is Feeding the Dragon. The author is Chris Fenton, a very accomplished Cornell alumni, graduated in 1993. And we should all have, God willing, knock on wood, the success that Chris has had. And I hope, and I'm sure we'll continue to have. So Chris, it's really a great honor and was very enjoyable today.
Yeah, I would love you guys to go on my Twitter, and spread the word, because I'd love to have more young people at Cornell on there so I can engage. Also, I believe the audio version of my book, I think, is still free on Amazon. So you guys should pick it up and then give it 5 stars too, even if you don't like it. Okay. But yeah, just engage. And then I do have that podcast too, Feeding the Dragon. Feel free to check it out. I keep it at a fun level. I don't get all bloviating and like experty. I try to keep it entertaining, but we do address real issues. So I'm glad all of you are cognizant of this challenge facing America, and really appreciate you reaching out, and good luck with the rest of the semester.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And just a reminder to everyone else, this is the first event of many in the China Initiative, Cornell Review's China Initiative speaker series. We'll be doing more of these in the coming weeks. So I sent the link to our website, and we have your email. So stay tuned. Look for that email. So thanks very much, everyone. Chris, a true honor. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.